photograph sits in the archives of the Blackwood County Historical Society, filed under Unexplained Disappearances, 19th Century. 23 faces stare out from the frame, arranged in 3 neat rows before the stone facade of St. Perpetua's Church. But if you look closely, really closely, you'll notice something unsettling. Reverend Josiah Weatherby stands in the center, looking very smug, almost as though he knows what is about to happen. Their devotion is palpable, even through the faded sepia tones. It's the look of people who have found something to believe in with every fiber of their being. Every single person in this photograph vanished on the night of November 7th, 1880. This is not a story about a church choir. This is a story about 22 people who followed a man they called Prophet into a darkness from which none of them returned. Josiah Weatherby came to Millbrook, Pennsylvania in the winter of 1865, carrying nothing but a leather satchel and that strange hymnal with its pages of cramped, archaic handwriting. The town was a logging community nestled in the hills, and St. Perpetua's Church needed a minister desperately after their previous one died of cholera. Weatherby was educated, intense, and compelling. Within months, he'd taken over the pulpit. Within a year, he'd begun to change everything. He introduced new hymns, old hymns he called them, though no one had heard them before. He spoke of the faith before the faith, of traditions that Christianity had buried but not destroyed. He preached about doorways and thresholds, about the world as a thin membrane separating us from truths most people couldn't bear to perceive. "We have been taught to fear the divine," he would say, his voice rising. "We have been told to kneel and wait for grace. But what if divinity isn't something above us? What if it's somewhere we can walk through? What if heaven is a place we can reach while still drawing breath?" The older members of the congregation were disturbed, but Weatherby had already begun gathering his true followers. He called them his choir. That was merely a designation that kept suspicions at bay. They were his disciples. Weatherby chose his choir members carefully over 15 years. He didn't select them for their voices. He selected them for their hunger, their brokenness, their desperation for escape. There was Emma Carlyle, whose husband had beaten her for years until he drowned drunk in the river. Thomas Brennan, a logger who'd lost 3 fingers and could no longer work. Young Esther Blackwell, unmarried at 28 and facing poverty. Sarah McAllister, whose child had died in infancy. The Kearney brothers, who'd come back from the war unable to sleep without seeing the faces of the men they'd killed. Each of them was broken. Each was searching for transformation. Weatherby gave them all the same promise: "Follow me faithfully, and I will lead you through the door. I will take you to the place where sorrow ends." By 1880, he had assembled 22 souls who would have walked into fire at his command. Martha Hendricks, who ran the general store, later testified that the choir members had become different people. They stopped caring about normal things, money, property, reputation. None of it mattered anymore. They talk about the crossing and the dissolution of barriers, and the way they looked at Reverend Weatherby. It was pure worship. Weatherby taught his followers about the threshold, a boundary between our world and what he called the first home. According to his doctrine, humanity had once lived in this other realm, a place of pure harmony where suffering and death were unknown, but we had been exiled, cast into the physical world as punishment. We are prisoners in flesh, he told them during Thursday evening sessions that were no longer mere choir practice. But the door was never sealed completely. The way back exists for those who know the ancient paths. The hymnal he carried contained the map, he claimed. Songs written in a language predating Babel, melodies that could reshape reality itself if sung with perfect faith and perfect unity. Music is mathematics, he explained, and mathematics is the language of creation. Sing the right equations with enough conviction, and you can open anything, even the gates of paradise itself. His followers believed him absolutely. They began dressing alike, simple dark clothing devoid of ornamentation. They stopped attending social functions. Several sold their homes and gave the money to Weatherby for the work. They spoke in cultish phrases. We are his instruments. He will lead us through. When the threshold opens, we will be worthy. 3 choir members were married with children. They abandoned their families without apparent guilt. The bonds of this world are chains, one said. Where we're going, there are no obligations except to truth. When Thomas Brennan's sister begged him to stop attending the meetings, he told her, You're already dead, Margaret. You just don't know it yet. When we cross over, you'll still be rotting here in this grey world, and I'll be singing in the light that never ends. October 1880 marked what Weatherby called the culmination. He announced that the time had come, that 15 years of preparation were about to bear fruit. The threshold would open on November 7th. The choir began their final preparations with religious fervor. They fasted for days at a time, drinking only water mixed with herbs that Weatherby prepared, concoctions that left them lightheaded and prone to visions. They memorized complex new harmonies. They practiced standing perfectly still for hours, learning to synchronize their breathing. We must become one instrument, Weatherby told them. 23 individuals will never open the door, but 23 voices singing as one voice, that has the power to reshape existence itself. The portrait session on October 31st was Weatherby's idea, but not for sentimental reasons. He commissioned it as a memorial. We must have a record of what we were, he explained, so that when we return, we can remember that we were once trapped as you are. The photographer, Silas Crane, was troubled by Weatherby's words. In his journal, he wrote, Weatherby spoke as though they were going on a journey. When I suggested they might want copies for their families, he laughed and said, Our families are coming with us. All 23 of us are family now. During that final week, the choir withdrew completely from Millbrook society. They spent every waking hour at the church, sleeping in the pews, eating meals together in the basement. Townspeople who passed by at night reported seeing candles burning in every window and hearing strange spiraling music that made listeners feel dizzy and displaced. Thomas Green, the blacksmith, later told investigators about the metal circle he'd forged for Weatherby, 6 feet in diameter, inscribed with symbols. He told me it was a frame for the door, Green said. Every door needs a frame, or it's just a hole in the air. The day arrived cold and misty. Inside St. Perpetua's Church, Josiah Weatherby prepared his flock for their final act of faith. All 22 choir members entered the church that evening between 6 and 7 o'clock. They carried nothing, no bags, no possessions, not even coats. Several were smiling. Sarah McAllister stopped to tell a neighbor, Tell my sister I'm sorry I couldn't bring her with us. Tell her I'll be singing for her in the place where children never die. The church doors closed at 7 p.m. exactly. The singing began around 7:30. At first, it was recognizable hymns, but by 8 o'clock, the music had transformed into something else entirely. Witnesses described hearing dozens of voices, then hundreds, as though the choir had been joined by unseen singers. It wasn't beautiful, Clara Pritchard said. It was terrifying. It sounded like the music was daring something, ripping through some fabric we couldn't see. The temperature plummeted. Frost spread across windows throughout Millbrook. Dogs howled. The ground beneath the church began to vibrate. Around 9 o'clock, lights appeared inside the church, pulsing flashes that shone through the windows in colors. Witnesses struggled to describe. Colors that hurt to look at, one man said. Then came Weatherby's voice, amplified somehow, rising above the choir's singing. "We are the faithful. The threshold opens. We step through together. One body, one voice, one purpose. Brothers and sisters, follow me into the light that never ends." The choir's response was instantaneous. "We follow. We cross. We are yours." Weatherby's final words rang out with ecstatic triumph. "Then leave your flesh behind and come." At 9:47 p.m., there was an explosion of light from the church. Brilliant, pure white, blinding. The ground shook violently. Every window shattered outward. And then silence. Complete, absolute, crushing silence. The rescue party that entered an hour later found the sanctuary empty. Sheet music lay scattered. Coats hung on hooks, but there were no people. In the basement, they found Weatherby's metal circle, set into the dirt floor, surrounded by scorch marks. Inside the circle, arranged perfectly, were 23 pairs of shoes, positioned as though their wearers had been standing in them, facing the center. Beside each pair was a pile of discarded clothing, folded with ritualistic precision. In the center of the circle, driven point first into the ground, was a knife. Tied to its handle was a note in Weatherby's handwriting. "We have crossed the threshold. We have shed the prison of flesh. Do not mourn us. We have gone willingly into glory. The door remains open for those with faith enough to follow. Listen for our voices in the spaces between sounds. We are singing still." J.W. The basement walls were covered in symbols, the same symbols from the metal circle, carved deep into the stone. Experts said they resembled nothing in any known language, though they followed mathematical patterns. Most disturbing was what they found beneath the circle when it was removed. The dirt had been excavated 3 feet deep, and at the bottom was a substance investigators couldn't identify. Something between liquid and light, shimmering and moving. When a worker reached to touch it, he screamed and pulled his hand back, claiming he'd heard voices whispering to him, calling him by his dead mother's name. The pit was filled with concrete. The church was sealed. St. Perpetua's Church still stands, abandoned but somehow preserved. The official explanation, mass suicide with hidden bodies, satisfies no one who examines the evidence. There were no bodies. There was no blood. Only that deliberate arrangement of shoes and clothing, left behind like shedskins, and that note written by a man who believed absolutely in his power to deliver his followers to salvation. In the years following, people claimed to hear singing from the forest near the church, those same spiraling harmonies. The sound would draw listeners forward, filling them with an overwhelming urge to follow it. 3 people vanished while investigating in the 1920s. The church was boarded up, though the boards never stay in place. The families of the choir members never recovered. Some maintained their loved ones were victims of manipulation, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Every indication points to 22 people who went willingly, even joyfully. They sold their possessions. They abandoned their families. They stood in that circle and removed their clothing with ritualistic precision. They believed, with absolute conviction, they believed Josiah Weatherby could lead them somewhere better. The question that haunts researchers is simple and terrible. What if he did? The photograph has been analyzed countless times. The choir members aren't simply looking at Weatherby. They're gazing at him with rapturous devotion that borders on religious ecstasy. Several have tears streaming down their faces. Their smiles are too wide, too intense, and Weatherby himself displays absolute certainty. This is not a man plagued by doubt. This is a man who knows something, who has seen something, who is utterly convinced of his power to deliver his followers to the promised land. But the most chilling detail is barely visible in the original print. In the shadows beside the church door, there's a blur, something tall and indistinct. Watching the assembly experts say it's likely a developing flaw, but no flaw can explain why the blur appears to have eyes, or why those eyes seem fixed on Weatherby, with an expression that might be hunger or anticipation or recognition. What was Weatherby really worshipping? What had spoken to him from that ancient hymnal? The files contain one final document, a letter Weatherby wrote to the church elders in 1879. "You have called me mad. You have said I lead the flock astray. But I have heard the voices from beyond the threshold. I have seen the place where we truly belong. This world is a shadow, a prison. I will free those who trust me. I will lead them through the door. And when we have crossed over, we will look back at you, still crawling in the mud, still suffering, still dying, and we will pity you for lacking the courage to follow." 22 people found that courage. 22 people followed their prophet into a basement, removed their earthly bodies like prisoners shedding chains, and stepped through a door that may have existed only in Weatherby's fevered mind. Or perhaps the door was real. Perhaps somewhere beyond our world, in a place where music is mathematics and faith reshapes reality, Josiah Weatherby and his choir are still singing. Or perhaps they found something else entirely, something that had been waiting patiently for a man arrogant enough to believe he could bargain with forces older than humanity, something that needed 23 willing souls to feed its ancient hunger. If you ever find yourself near the ruins of Millbrook, near the stone church that refuses to crumble, listen carefully on quiet nights. You might hear them singing still, and if you listen long enough, you might begin to understand the words. And if you understand the words, you might feel the pull, that same irresistible urge that drew 22 souls to follow a prophet through a door that should never have been opened. The locals will tell you to turn back, to ignore the singing, to never enter St. Perpetua's church. Because Weatherby's door is still there, they say, still open. And something on the other side is still singing, still calling, still gathering a new choir for the next crossing. The question isn't whether the cult succeeded in their goal. The question is, what exactly did they become when they reached it?